Hi, I'm Maura. I begged my stepmother for help the night I lost everything. My job, my relationship, my last shred of pride. She looked me in the eye, smiled in front of her friends, and said, "You're a burden. I should have kicked you out years ago." That same night, my father stood behind her and said nothing. But what they didn't know was, my mother had left me a trail, a hidden file, a truth so deep it shattered every lie they built. They stole my name, my home, even my goodbye. So I stopped asking to be included and started digging. What do you do when the people meant to protect you rewrite you out of your own life? The air hit different when I stepped out of the cab, not cold enough to sting, but sharp, like it wanted me to question why I came back. Madison hadn't changed. Same coffee shop with the always faded open late sign, same crack on the driveway of the house I used to call home. But me? I was walking in as someone they didn't expect to return, especially not holding a suitcase and a layoff email in my inbox. I hesitated at the porch. My fingers grazed the handrail, and the chill from the metal made me flinch. Maybe it was a sign. Maybe I should have called first. But pride makes you believe people will act right if you just show up with sincerity. I knocked. The door opened quicker than I thought it would, and there she was, Valora. Hair pulled back like she was headed to a brunch photo shoot, not like she was expecting me. Her lips curled before I said a word. She didn't look surprised. She looked inconvenienced. "Maura," she said, not even a question. More like a diagnosis. "What are you doing here?" I kept my voice steady. "I just need a place for a few days. I lost my job. Things with Anthony ended. I need a reset." She crossed her arms and stepped halfway into the frame, revealing her two yoga friends standing behind her in matching windbreakers. "You? Again? You're a burden. You always have been. I should have kicked you out years ago." I blinked. My heart didn't drop. It clenched. It wanted to jump forward, to argue, but my mind anchored me to silence. One of the women behind her let out a soft gasp, half polite, half entertained. I recognized her from church potlucks. She once complimented my mom's casserole. Now she looked at me like I was the drama she wasn't expecting to get live. "I'm not here to stay long," I managed, gripping the handle of my suitcase like it would defend me. "Just a few days." Valora took a step closer. Her voice dropped an octave, but her smile stretched wider. "You're 32. You should have your life together by now. This house isn't a rescue mission, it's a home, our home." I looked past her, into the hallway where my mother's quilt used to hang. It wasn't there anymore. Replaced by one of those generic signs that read, "Bless this mess." A fitting metaphor. Valora turned halfway toward her guests. "Let's not let this ruin our afternoon," she said to them sweetly. Then to me, with steel, "You need to go." Behind her, laughter started back up, low and forced. That's when he appeared. Malcolm, my father. He stepped into the frame like an actor who forgot his lines. His gaze didn't meet mine. He looked at my suitcase instead. "Dad," I said, my voice smaller than I intended. "I just need a place to figure things out." He didn't blink. Didn't even frown. Just adjusted his collar and cleared his throat. "Valora's had a rough week," he said. "Let's not make things worse." That line. That cheap, hollow line. Like my presence was poison and her peace more important than my survival. My breath stayed even, but something snapped clean in my chest. I stood there, stunned, not at her cruelty. I expected that. It was his vacancy that pierced deeper. I realized then, it wasn't just about not having a place to stay. It was about them never meaning to make space for me at all. "I see," I said. And I did. No tears. No scenes. I turned, walked down the steps without glancing back. The wind pushed against my coat like it wanted to usher me off the property quicker, so I let it. I didn't stop walking until I reached the corner. Then I sat on the bench by the fire hydrant, one that still had my initials carved in from a childhood dare. Funny how some things stay while people change into strangers with your last name. I pulled out my phone, opened my notes, and wrote one line. "They think I'm defeated, but I know more than they do." I looked back once, just once, And even from a block away, I saw Valora pull the curtain to check if I was gone. I smiled. Not out of happiness, but because she was watching. I didn't need keys to know I was locked out, I whispered. But what they didn't know was that I didn't come back empty. They had forgotten what I carried, but I hadn't. 3 days passed since I stood on that porch like a delivery gone wrong. Since then, the silence from my father and Valora had been more deafening than any slam of a door. I hadn't heard from either of them, not a call, not a text, not even a passive-aggressive message through a third party. It wasn't just rejection, it was deletion. This morning, I walked downtown to the county clerk's office. I wasn't entirely sure what I was looking for, only that something inside me whispered, "Start with the records." The city had digitized most estate documents over the past decade, but they kept hard copies for contested cases or disputed amendments. I had a name, my mother's, and a sense that somewhere in all this, I'd been written out of a story that used to be mine. While waiting in line, I noticed a flyer taped to the bulletin board across the lobby. Community Gala, honoring generational legacy. Valora Gaskin was listed as the keynote, and under sponsors? The Gaskin Family Fund. I didn't need to read further. I knew exactly which fund that was. When it was my turn, the clerk, a woman maybe 10 years older than me, barely looked up as she clicked through her terminal. Name? Maura Delaney, I said. I'm requesting records regarding the property previously registered to Eva Delaney. She typed, eyes squinting. Property transferred 2 years ago. Deed now sits under Callista Gaskin. Callista, my stepsister, the one Valora introduced to the neighborhood as the daughter we raised together. That house was promised to me. My mother had designed it as my graduation gift from college. Hardwood floors she picked out herself. The sunroom built to hold my books. She didn't just build a house, she built a future, and they handed it off like junk mail, addressed to the wrong name. I asked for a printed copy. The clerk handed it over with a straight face. Then she said, "Anything else?" Like I was ordering coffee. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I stepped outside, the paper in my hand folding under my grip. Later that afternoon, I opened my calendar and blinked at the date. My birthday. No calls, no messages, nothing from family. I wasn't surprised, just still. There's a difference between knowing the fire's out and still feeling the warmth on your skin. Scrolling through my phone out of habit, I tapped into social media. Valora had gone live. The caption read, "Surprising our girl." The camera wobbled as she stepped into a room filled with gold balloons, champagne flutes, and smiling faces. At the center was Callista, hands over her mouth, fake tears welling like she'd just won a talent show. Behind her, a giant banner. "To my shining girl, the future of our family." The timestamp on the video matched today. My birthday. I didn't cry. I didn't throw the phone. I just watched, then closed the app. Quiet, like always. My mother's voice echoed from a journal I hadn't opened in years. Don't measure your worth by who remembers your birthday. Some forget out of habit, others out of intention. By dusk, I found myself standing across the street from the family house. I hadn't meant to walk there, but my feet took me anyway. The windows glowed with warm light. Laughter spilled from inside, faint but steady. Music played, Callista's favorite pop band, and in that house, in the living room my mother once called sacred, they toasted another woman with my future in her hands. I didn't step forward, I didn't knock, I just watched. They celebrated her in the house my mother built for me. That wasn't a mistake, that was a message. And for the first time, I decided to write one back. A week later, I found myself in the public library archives, not because I had a clear plan, but because something kept tugging at the part of me that refused to sit still. I'd been waking up each morning in that borrowed sublet with the kind of ache that doesn't go away with coffee or fresh air. It was the kind that said, "You're missing something." My mother's voice wouldn't stop echoing in my head. The things she used to say in half-whispers when she thought I wasn't listening. Warnings disguised as endearments. Promises folded into recipes and hugs. That memory, her leaning over her laptop, closing it with a soft click, came back stronger than it had in years. At the digital archives terminal, I logged into an old email account tied to her estate work. It was more out of curiosity than anything else. I didn't expect access, let alone value. But the moment the inbox loaded, my breath caught. There were emails. Dozens of them, most marked unread. I clicked the oldest ones first. Subject lines like Maura's share, urgent, update to living trust, and please confirm attached documents. All were sent to my father. All were ignored. One line, dated just 10 days before she died, read, Malcolm, I need you to protect Maura. I've updated the will. Valora shouldn't have access until after the review. Another, even colder. I don't trust her, Mal. She's too close. Something's off. I scrolled faster, clicking through timestamps and legal jargon, my heart punching through each second of denial. Most of these messages had been rerouted to spam, automatically or perhaps manually. The only person who had access to her accounts while she was under hospice care was Valora. She hadn't just inserted herself into our home. She had inserted herself into my mother's digital life, too. She wasn't just here for comfort, I whispered, the air thick inside the quiet library. She was here for control. I printed everything I could, screenshots, attachments, anything that had my name, my mother's instructions, her signature. The printer whirred behind me like it knew what I was about to do mattered. Back at my apartment that evening, the sun had dipped low behind the bare trees outside the window. I dropped the stack of documents on the kitchen table and sat in the silence for a long time. Then, slowly, I began digging through the boxes I'd rescued from my old room before they changed the locks. One was labeled in my mother's handwriting, Journals, Keep. It smelled faintly like her perfume. I flipped through the pages, not looking for anything in particular, until a memory sparked. She had once said, "Only open this if they try to erase you." I hadn't understood it then. I did now. I ran to the last box at the bottom of the stack, the one I hadn't opened yet. Under old textbooks and framed pictures, I found it. A small laptop wrapped in a worn scarf. Its charger barely worked, but when it finally booted, the screen blinked, then froze. The hard drive was shot. But next to it, taped inside the lid, was a tiny flash drive, labeled in my mom's handwriting, "In case they forget you." I plugged it in. Password protected. I closed my eyes. Then I remembered. There was a name she used to call me, one Valora hated. A nickname only my mother used, Bertie. She'd written once in her journal, "Use the name I gave you before they changed it." I typed it in. The screen blinked. The files opened, and what I found rewrote everything they thought I'd forget. The apartment was still when I got back. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't need them. My mother's voice from the video echoed in my mind like a hymn I wasn't ready to stop hearing. I played it again, third time that day. Her words felt more alive than half the people breathing in my life right now. While the screen flickered quietly across my coffee table, I glanced at the wall across the room. A photo used to hang there, once framed and centered in the hallway of the family home. The one where I stood between my mother and father, arms loosely around their waists, wearing a smile that didn't know what was coming. I wondered if it was still there. 2 mornings later, I found myself parked down the block from the old house. Valora and Malcolm weren't home, probably out at one of those donor luncheons where they praised themselves for keeping the family legacy alive. I still had the old garage code. Apparently, they hadn't changed it. Inside, the air was colder than I remembered, not in temperature, but in memory. I moved carefully through the living room, where every object had been rearranged to look expensive, staged, impersonal. Then I saw it. The photo was still on the wall, but I wasn't in it. Same scene, same outfits, same day. But the crop had shifted. I'd been removed. The frame had a new engraved plate. Family, the bonds that matter. The message wasn't subtle. It wasn't even creative. I took a picture of it with my phone. Then I left. Quietly, deliberately. That afternoon, I walked into a pharmacy with a photo kiosk in the back and asked the clerk if he could help me compare 2 versions of the same image. He looked young, maybe 21. "You think this was reprinted?" he asked, tapping through settings. I nodded. He leaned in. "Yeah, definitely. See here?" He pointed to the corner edge. The resolution loss and image cropping. Someone altered the original dimensions. This wasn't a factory default. Someone cut this frame intentionally. I stared at the printout in my hand. My absence wasn't a mistake. It was a choice, an edit. They weren't just removing me from the room. They were removing me from the record. Back at the apartment, I paced. Something didn't sit right. The level of removal, the obsessive erasure, it felt more calculated than I had let myself believe. Valora hadn't just married my father after Mom died. She had arrived before that. I dug through one of the document folders I'd pulled from the flash drive. Medical files, hospice papers. One line caught my eye. Primary palliative nurse, Valora Simmons, RN. It hit me like a cold slap. She wasn't just my father's girlfriend after my mother passed. She had been there during... Right beside her, spooning soup and managing medications, smiling in the background of every well-meaning condolence photo. A search online confirmed it. Valora had been employed at Madison Mercy Health for 9 years. She resigned 2 days after my mother's death. Not after marrying Malcolm, not after moving in, after Mom died. She didn't just marry my father. She infiltrated us through my mother's pain. She watched my mother weaken. She heard every last request. She witnessed every legal conversation, every whisper of concern. And then she flipped the script. This wasn't some gold-digging convenience. It was a campaign. I sat in that silence for a long time, letting the full breadth of it settle. There's a difference between being betrayed and being preyed on. This was the latter. That night, as dusk fell across the street, I passed by the house again. I stood under the trees, shadows curling across my feet, watching. Callista stood on the porch in a dress I recognized, mine, from a family gathering years ago. She posed for a selfie, head tilted, caption already forming on her phone screen. Moments later, the photo hit social media. "Legacy looks good on us." I didn't approach. I didn't wave. I just smiled. Let them play pretend. I was done asking to be seen. I came to remove their masks. And the first to slip wasn't Valora. It was my name, on a deed, no longer mine. And the first to slip wasn't Valora. It was my name, on a deed, no longer mine. It took me 3 days to stop shaking. Not from fear, but from clarity. There's a kind of tremor that only comes when the pieces begin to fit too perfectly. That flash drive had shown me truths. But truth alone doesn't hold ground. Documents do. So I went to the source. The Public Records Office on Hamilton Street looked the same as it had a decade ago. Dull carpeting, humming fluorescent lights, and staff who blinked more slowly than they spoke. But today, I didn't need speed. I needed confirmation. "Property records for Delaney, Eva," I said at the front desk, sliding my ID under the glass. "Specifically, anything pertaining to 112 Crescent Lake Drive." The clerk, a man in his late 50s with nicotine-stained fingers, typed half-heartedly and nodded toward the printer behind him. "Transferred 2 years ago," he said. "Sole title? Callista Gaskin." I felt the words before I processed them. Yeah, like a stone to the chest. I knew. But knowing doesn't dull the cut. The house at Crescent Lake wasn't just another property. It was the house. My mother designed every corner of it, from the wraparound porch to the reading nook she built under the stairs. I had picked out paint colors for that house when I was 17. She told me, "This place will be your piece one day." It had become someone else's prize. I asked for the deed file. The clerk handed it over without looking me in the eye. I stepped outside, sat on the curb, and flipped through the pages. Page 3. Voluntary release of ownership interest. Signed, Maura Delaney. My hand went cold. I stared at the signature, scanned the curves of each letter. The M was wrong. My last name was abbreviated. I'd never, in my life, signed legal documents like that. And the date? 6 months after my mother died. 6 months when I was barely leaving bed, let alone signing away property. I knew who had done it. And I knew who had watched it happen. That afternoon, I walked straight into my father's office. He looked up from his computer with a half smile, the kind you reserve for an old friend you hope won't ask too much. I sat down across from him and placed the printed deed on his desk. "Did you forge my name?" His face barely moved, just a blink, then the smallest sigh. Valora said you agreed verbally, that you just didn't want to deal with the paperwork." "That's convenient," I said, my voice as still as I could hold it. "Especially since I was in therapy 4 days a week trying to breathe without Mom." He looked away, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "We thought you'd moved on. You weren't engaged. You didn't show interest." I leaned in. "You let them fake my voice. Again." He didn't argue, which, in a way, was worse. "You don't need to scream to disappear someone," I said. "You just need the right form and a lazy witness." He flinched. I pulled a copy of the release form from my bag and folded it neatly. "I'm going to reclaim what was never yours to take." As I left his office, he didn't call after me. Didn't stand, just sat there, smaller than I'd ever seen him, buried in the very silence he'd once used as a shield. Back at my apartment, I scanned the forged document into my laptop, attached it to an email addressed to a real estate attorney I'd found the night before. The subject line was simple: illegitimate transfer, fraud investigation request. I clicked send, then I sat in the dark for a while, hands still hovering over the trackpad. They'd stolen land, but I still owned the map. And the trail that map led to? It started with a toast, not raised to me. And the trail that map led to? It started with a toast, not raised to me. The invitation came in a thin cream envelope with my name printed clean across the front, no return address. I assumed it was junk until I opened it and saw the letterhead, Community Arts Center, a tribute event for the late Eva Delaney, honoring her contributions to women's education. I stared at the invitation for a long minute. There was no mention of me, no RSVP request, no personal note, just a flyer listing keynote speaker Callista Gaskin. Still, I went. I arrived 10 minutes early, hoping to slip in unnoticed. The room smelled like fresh paint and catered fruit platters, folded chairs, low chatter, and a projection screen already glowing with a slideshow of my mother's face, photo after photo. Eva planting flowers in the garden, Eva standing with community leaders, Eva cutting a ribbon for the reading program she started. But something was missing in all of them. Me. I took a seat in the back. Most people didn't recognize me, or they pretended not to. Valora was near the front, standing close to the mayor. She looked radiant, styled to perfection. Beside her, Callista waited near the podium with a folder clutched like it held truth. A hush fell. Lights dimmed. Callista stepped forward and began to speak. "A daughter's gratitude," she began. "I was blessed to be raised by a woman who believed in the power of story, who taught me that being a woman meant using your voice, not just to speak, but to lead." I clenched my jaw. That woman wasn't hers. That woman was mine. As she continued, the slideshow behind her displayed quotes my mother used to scribble on recipe cards. The audience nodded along like they'd all known her that well. A woman beside me whispered to her husband, "Isn't it beautiful how Valora adopted Callista after the tragedy? Some people just know how to love." I bit my tongue so hard it throbbed. I could taste metal. Then they announced the launch of the Gaskin Fund for Creative Women, built in honor of Eva Delaney, but named after the woman who rewrote her history and the girl who replaced her daughter. Applause thundered. People stood. And I clapped too, quietly. Not for them, but for the performance. For how well they pulled it off. They wrapped their lie in my mother's memory. And I clapped by mistake. After the event, I drove toward the house. I didn't even think about it. My hands just turned the wheel and guided me there, like muscle memory, like a ghost returning to its origin. The lights were on. Music floated out through the walls, something upbeat and disposable. I walked up and tried my old key. It didn't fit. I jiggled it, tried again. Still nothing. I knocked. No answer. Then my phone buzzed. From Valora. "Let's not make things messy. Time to move on." No greeting, no warmth, no acknowledgement that I had once eaten dinner at that table for 18 years. I stepped back from the door. Then I heard laughter. Looked through the side window and saw them all. Malcolm sitting on the couch with a glass of wine, not looking toward the door. Callista spinning in the center of the room, wearing a blue satin dress, my dress, the one my mother had given me when I got my first real job. Valora lifted her glass. To family that shows up. They didn't see me watching, and I didn't flinch. I turned, walked back to my car with the calm of someone who had already died in that house 100 times. They locked me out. But I'd already stepped out of that house. What they didn't know was I'd started building mine. I got into the car, closed the door, and let the stillness wash over me. Then I opened my laptop, played the video from my mother again, not for comfort this time, but for study. There, behind her on the shelf, barely visible, sat a red binder with a worn label. Living Trust Addendum, Confidential. I froze the frame. And suddenly, I knew where to look next. The one place Valora never touched. My mother's real office. Because next, I wasn't just confronting their stories, I was rewriting the law behind them. I hadn't been inside my mother's old office in over a year. It sat untouched above a florist shop downtown, the key still hidden in the bottom lining of my purse like a secret I didn't want to admit I needed. But that red binder in the background of the video, the one labeled Living Trust Addendum, Confidential, pointed here. The room smelled of lavender and paper, just like she left it. Nothing had been packed up. No one had dared. It was as if time had stopped the day we lowered her into the ground. I found the binder on the bottom shelf, right where the camera had caught it. Next to it sat a portable hard drive labeled Personal 2022. I plugged it in at home and waited while it spun to life. Folders filled the screen, photos, audio clips, legal drafts. But one file stopped me. Voice notes raw. I clicked. It was Valora's voice, not staged, not performative. Not dressed for public viewing. She thinks she's owed something just because her mother birthed her. That girl's a drain, a ghost who won't leave the room. Pause. Muffled clinking of glass. Laughter in the background. I told Malcolm she's not built for this life. She'll fade. I sat there, jaw locked, the audio looping in my ears like a sermon from hell. Sunday came. A dinner I hadn't been invited to but knew would be at the house. Family, church friends, the usual supporters of the Gaskin brand. Valora never missed a chance to stage herself. I didn't knock. I walked right in. They were seated, passing plates, laughter hanging in the air like a curtain. Valora looked up mid-sip and smiled, too wide, too ready. "Look who finally decided to join us," she said, standing slowly. "Everyone, Maura's here. Let's show her what real grace looks like." She picked up the remote and turned on the flat screen. A recording played, my voice, clipped and cold, saying things I'd never said in that order. "I never cared about this family. I don't need them. They're all leeches." I recognized the words. They were mine, but from different days, different contexts, edited, pieced together like Frankenstein's monster stitched from sound bites. "This is what we've dealt with," Valora announced to the guests. "That's why she was asked to leave." I didn't flinch. I stepped forward, pulled a flash drive from my coat pocket, and inserted it into the media port beneath the screen. "Play this." The room hushed. Valora tensed. My mother's office audio began, clear, uncut. Valora's voice again, this time asking me to stay out of Callista's way. That I should let the real daughter have the spotlight. That I needed to keep my mouth shut and be grateful. The silence was brutal. Someone in the back coughed. A woman whispered to her husband. That didn't sound like the same tone she made it out to be. I turned to Valora, whose face had hardened like porcelain about to crack. "You can edit sound," I said evenly, "but not silence, and in silence, truth rings louder," she snapped. "Everything she has is because of me." Her voice shrilled across the table. "The clothes on her back, the doors she walked through, even her college." I stayed still. "Everything I had," I said quietly, "was from a woman who died with dignity. You just spent it." Eyes turned to Malcolm. He didn't move, didn't speak. "Of course," I said, not looking at him. "Stand by, stand silent. Same script, different day." I faced him directly now. I don't need you to stand up for me anymore. Just stand back. I gathered my bag. As I passed the entryway, a man near the door leaned toward the woman beside him and whispered, just loud enough for me to catch it. That girl's not crazy. She's calculating. Good. Let them think I'm dangerous. That's better than disposable. Because next, I wasn't just confronting their stories. I was rewriting the law behind them. The formal invitation had come by email. Clean, cold, and so obviously Valora. Subject line, Family Financial Review. Thursday, 6:30 p.m. No warmth, no explanation, just a time and location. But this time, I wasn't walking into their house with my head down. I came armed with truth. The air inside the Gaskin home was heavy with polished wood scent and the kind of tension you could spread on toast, long dining table, wine glasses already filled, folded linen napkins resting on every plate. Callista, naturally, sat at the head of the table where my mother used to. Valora hovered behind her like a queenmaker. Malcolm just existed, breathing furniture. Maura, Valora greeted, surprise barely hidden beneath her lipstick-stained smile. Didn't expect you'd make it. I placed my bag on the floor, unzipped it slowly. Family matters, right? I replied. Wouldn't miss it. The first 20 minutes were a performance. Valora read numbers off a printed spreadsheet as if they were scripture. Callista made a show of pretending to understand them. The guests, half relatives, half leeches, nodded like choir members trained to hum on cue. Then I stood. There's something I'd like to add. Valora froze. This isn't the time. I reached into my bag and placed a portable projector on the table, plugged it into the power strip, inserted the flash drive. The lights dimmed because I'd already arranged it with the house staff on my way in. The screen flickered. My mother appeared. Not a photo, not a voiceover, a video, time-stamped, notarized. If they ever try to rewrite my voice, she said calmly, let this be the one they hear. I left everything to Maura. She is my legacy. Silence. Complete, choking, beautiful silence. Callista's wine glass clinked softly as she lowered it, her face blank. Malcolm's voice cracked through the tension. That wasn't in the file we saw. I turned to him. That's because Valora buried it. Just like she buried me. Valora stood, knocking her chair slightly. This is doctored, staged. You're playing games with grief. I didn't flinch. You edited a daughter out of her mother's last words. But here she is. Uncut. A man across the table, my uncle on my mother's side, cleared his throat. That looks very real. More silence. I let it sit. Then I reached into the bag again, pulled out a printed copy of the will, one Valora had submitted during probate. I placed it on the table. Let's talk ink. I pulled out a small UV pen light and turned off the lamp above us. Everyone leaned in. Under the glow, faint traces appeared. My name, my legal name, scrubbed with fading chemicals, but still there. Invisible ink doesn't hold in front of real fire, I said. This was never her document to claim. It was mine to defend. Callista dropped her fork. No one picked it up. Valora's voice came lower this time, but no less venomous. You'll destroy this family. I stared at her for a long second, then said softly but clearly, you destroyed it when you rewrote it without me. No one had anything left to say. I turned off the projector, unplugged my drive, zipped the bag, and walked toward the door without looking back. Outside, the wind had picked up, but I barely felt it. The stars above Madison blinked like they knew a shift had come, like the weight I'd carried since the funeral had finally been passed, right where it belonged. I didn't need applause. I just needed the silence to shift. And tonight, it did. But the fallout was just beginning, and the first call wasn't from a lawyer. It was from someone I'd never expected. But the fallout was just beginning, and the first call wasn't from a lawyer. It was from Jared. A text, short and hesitant. I owe you a conversation. Meet me. I stared at it for a full minute before responding with an address to a quiet cafe near the square. The last time we spoke, it ended in slammed doors and sharp words. Back then, I thought he'd left because I wasn't enough. Now I knew better. He was already there when I walked in, hair a little grayer at the temples, shoulders more slouched than I remembered. He stood as I approached but didn't reach for a hug. I was glad for that. "Thanks for coming," he said, his voice dry but sincere. "I figured if you were finally going to say something, I'd listen," I replied, sitting across from him. We skipped small talk. Jared exhaled. "I didn't end things with you because I wanted to," he said, eyes locked on the untouched coffee in front of him. "Valora reached out, told me you were unstable. That there were legal concerns. She made it sound like you were spiraling." I didn't blink. "She's good at rewriting people." He looked up, shame heavy in his face. "I was young and stupid, and she spoke like someone trying to help you." "She wasn't," I said simply. "She was trying to isolate me, and you made it easier for her." His mouth opened, closed again. Finally, he said, "I'm sorry. I really am. You deserved better." I nodded. "You're right. I did." The conversation stalled after that. He offered to pay for my tea. I declined. On the walk out, he handed me a thumb drive. "There's something you should see. From a gala a few years ago. I didn't realize it had audio until recently." That night, I sat on my couch and listened. It was background noise at first, glasses clinking, people laughing. Then, softly, my mother's voice. "I hope Maura doesn't find out what they're doing. It'll break her." I didn't cry. I didn't react. I just leaned back and let the truth settle like dust in the dark. Later that evening, my phone buzzed again. A voicemail from Malcolm. "Maura, I'm sorry things got out of hand. Maybe we can fix this quietly. The media doesn't have to know. Let's keep it dignified. No emotion, no remorse, just containment." I played it twice, then deleted it. Sorry wasn't a bridge, it was a rope, and I wasn't grabbing it. I forwarded the voicemail to my attorney with a note. Add to case file. Label, damage control. The house was burning, and they were still trying to save the curtains. I stepped out onto the porch for air. The stars above Madison looked indifferent, the sky soft and black. And for the first time, I didn't feel small beneath it. I felt whole, scarred maybe, but still here. I didn't need anyone to call me brave. I just needed the silence to finally echo something back other than doubt. And if they feared what I'd find, they hadn't seen what I'd do with it. But if they feared what I'd find, they hadn't seen what I'd do with it. The office was quiet, tucked inside a brownstone on the east side of town, the kind of place where justice still felt like it could happen quietly. I handed the attorney a thick envelope of documents, watched as she skimmed through pages I had memorized by now. Bank statements, collections notices in my name, loan approvals I never requested, every piece of paper stamped with an identity I thought belonged solely to me, until now. Her eyes paused on one form and narrowed. "This loan was taken out when you were overseas. Any idea who had access to your social security number back then?" I didn't flinch. "Valora. She helped me with some of my college paperwork, had copies of everything." She nodded slowly, clicked her pen once. "She didn't just erase you from the will. She built her survival on your name." I signed the fraud complaint with a steady hand. Let's make that survival very temporary. Within days, the flags started popping up. Valora's credit file was pulled for investigation. A second loan showed a forged signature, my name, with an extra loop on the Y I've never used. The attorney smiled when I confirmed the discrepancy. "She made me invisible," I told her, "but now she's the one under a microscope." While that was unfolding, another call came. This one from a local journalist I vaguely remembered from the tribute event. "I'm doing a story," she said, "on deceptive nonprofit branding. Someone sent me a tip. I'd like to show you something." She forwarded an image. It was a promotional flyer from a grief initiative run by Valora's fund. The photo? A woman holding her dying mother's hand in hospice. The caption read, "Callista, holding her mother's hand in her final moments." But the woman in the photo wasn't Callista. It was me. I zoomed in, recognizing the sweater I'd worn during the final week of my mother's life. The ring she had asked me to wear, the way my hand cupped hers, gently, protectively. They'd cropped my face out, blurred it slightly, but it was my hand, my grief, my goodbye. The journalist met me that afternoon. I brought the original photo, unedited. I showed her the context, the moment, the truth. "Would you be willing to go on record?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "But not because I need revenge, because she doesn't get to tell my story anymore." The piece aired that weekend. The segment ended with a clip of me, softly spoken but clear. I was never the daughter who smiled for the camera. I was the one who held her hand when no one else showed up. The response was immediate. Messages poured in. Emails from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Strangers who recognized the ache behind my voice. Former teachers. Even my aunt in Vermont, who hadn't spoken to me since the funeral, left a voicemail choking back tears. I didn't need them to validate me, but it was nice to feel seen. A few days later, I passed a bulletin board downtown near the community center. Someone had pinned the article, "Truth always surfaces, the other daughter speaks." Beneath it, I pinned a slip of paper with my mother's handwriting. Her favorite quote, "Silence is not consent." And I walked away knowing I had finally spoken. But I wasn't done yet. There was still one letter left to deliver, one voice left to hear. There was still one letter left to deliver, one voice left to hear. The call came late in the morning, just as I was pouring coffee into a chipped mug that once belonged to my mother. I recognized the voice instantly, soft, firm, like worn leather, belonging to Inez Thorne. She had been my mother's closest friend, maybe even the only one she ever fully trusted. "I've got something you need to read," she said without preamble. She gave it to me 2 weeks before she passed, told me to wait. "To wait for what?" I asked. "Until you stopped believing them." We agreed to meet near the bench behind my old high school, the one my mother used to sit at every Friday after work, with her thermos of tea and a crossword folded in half. The wind rustled through the dying leaves as Inez approached, wearing the same heavy wool coat she wore to my mother's funeral. She sat beside me and reached into her bag, pulling out a sealed envelope, yellowed, soft at the corners. My name was written in my mother's cursive across the front. "To Maura, only if they break you." "I couldn't read it," Inez said. "Didn't want to. It wasn't for me. And you hadn't been broken yet." I held the envelope for a few seconds, thumb resting on the seal, afraid that opening it would mean admitting how far I'd fallen. But then I thought about the courtroom, the forged loans, the photos twisted into propaganda, the silence of a father who used to hum lullabies. I tore it open. Inside was one page. "They will try to redefine love, make you earn your place in a story you already belong to. You don't owe them silence. You owe yourself truth." Her handwriting was shaky but clear, every letter landing like a stone in my chest. I folded the letter back into the envelope with shaking fingers. For the first time in months, I didn't feel rage swelling in my throat. I felt seen. Inez placed her hand over mine. "You didn't just survive," she said. "You remembered how to stand." We sat in quiet, the kind that feels like church. Later that day, I returned home to the apartment I once treated like a temporary bunker. But now, it felt like a starting line. There was one last box under my bed I hadn't touched since the funeral. I pulled it out, removed the lid, and lifted each item with care. Cards, photos, fragments of a life that once belonged to all three of us. At the bottom was a Polaroid. Me, age 9, smiling wide, cheeks covered in flour, my mother's arm wrapped tight around me. In her handwriting on the back, "You, before they made you question it." I stared at that photo for a long time, and I knew, no legal win, no news segment, no amount of public vindication could replace what they took. But this was something they couldn't erase. I didn't call Malcolm. I didn't reply to Valora's last voicemail, the one that said, "Maybe we can talk, off the record." They didn't deserve the luxury of my voice anymore. Let them reckon with the silence they created. I'm not theirs to interpret anymore. That afternoon, I emailed the court, confirming closure of the suit. I checked the box that read, "No restitution requested. Name restoration only," because at the end of it all, I wasn't chasing money. I was reclaiming my name. The next morning, I walked past the courthouse. Valora stood across the street, smaller than I remembered, clutching her purse like it held her place in the world. Our eyes met. For a breath, I nodded once, calm, complete, and kept walking. Not all wounds bleed. Some become foundations for something only you can build. Not all wounds bleed. Some become foundations for something only you can build. I walked into the courthouse alone. No entourage, no family, just a folder, a pen, and the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing left to prove and everything left to protect. The final hearing to validate my mother's trust documents had been rescheduled 3 times, each delay a tactic, a stall, a desperate grab for control from people who'd built their lives on manipulation. But that morning, the games ended. The judge called the session to order. Valora sat beside her attorney, stone-faced and too still. Callista was behind her, arms folded, mouth twitching like she had a speech rehearsed in her head. Malcolm wasn't there. I submitted the last piece. "Your Honor," I said, "I'm submitting evidence previously withheld by the opposition. It includes medical records and genetic testing." There was a pause, the kind where oxygen seems to thin. The judge nodded. "Proceed." A document was passed forward. It was Valora's prenatal record, a file dated 18 years ago from Madison Mercy Hospital. The line that mattered, fetal demise at 13 weeks, a miscarriage. Then the next file, Callista's adoption papers, finalized 6 months later, closed case, sealed until now. And the third, a DNA test proving I was Eva Delaney's only biological heir. Valora's mouth opened. The judge raised a hand. "No interruptions. This is federal-level fraud. Let me read it all." 20 minutes passed in review. Every forged form, every erased name, every reappropriated dollar. Then the gavel struck once. Legal ownership of all listed properties, assets, and accounts shall revert fully to Maura Delaney. Callista Gaskin is not recognized as a legal heir. Court is adjourned. Callista stood. "This isn't fair." "This is not your narrative," the judge said, voice cutting clean. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I nodded. "You lied to become something you couldn't be," I said, locking eyes with Valora. "I lived the truth you tried to kill." Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered, but I walked right past them. The next week, the community center quietly removed Valora's name from their mural. Her honorary title, rescinded. A story went viral. When silence becomes power, the woman who reclaimed her story. I turned down every interview, every podcast, every camera crew offer. Instead, I filed paperwork to open a women's shelter under my mother's name, Eva's Light. The first check I signed went to a girl in a college application crisis, just like I had been once. The same day, Malcolm sent a letter. I didn't open it, just dropped it into the fireplace, watched it curl into ash. He wrote when the world stopped applauding, not when I was breaking. 2 weeks later, I sat by the lake where my mother used to watch the sunrise. The wind off the water carried a softness I hadn't felt since her hands last held mine. Across the shoreline, the house stood still, but the nameplate had changed. The Delaney house. Mine. Again. I whispered. They buried me in a legacy I was born to protect. So I dug up the truth and made it mine. My phone buzzed. A message from the attorney. Estate officially closed. Congratulations, Ms. Delaney. I stared at the screen, smiled once, but I wasn't finished yet, because what they tried to destroy became the blueprint I'd build from.